Today, we become legends.
Hey, my name's Inter, and welcome back to the channel for yet another god guide on Inter Games. Today, we're going to be covering VulCAN'T, one of the newer gods to be ported to SMITE 2, and he got some absolutely crazy +1 changes. Basically, entirely to his passive. His base kit got almost no changes, but the passive got some absolutely crazy things. It's like he has almost an aspect built into his base kit. It's insane. But yeah, as always, we'll be going through VulCAN'T's abilities, combos, builds, all that kind of stuff. And VulCAN'T is generally an ability-based burst mage. He has a lot of turret synergy. He can create turrets and can have a little bit of viability built around those turrets. But for the most part, he's a high ability burst damage mage is how you're going to be playing him for the most part. Viable mostly in mid lane. You could try him in some other roles as well, maybe a little bit of solo lane or whatever, maybe even in support, but for the most part, generally you're going to be playing VulCAN'T in mid with burst damage. That's the best way to play him. But yeah, without further ado, let's jump in with his kit. So first up, we have VulCAN'T's passive, which is a kind of a doozy, honestly. So VulCAN'T has access to a variety of mods in the item shop that affect his abilities. There's 3 sets of mods available at different levels, and you can only take 1 from each set. And then he also has his regular SMITE 1 passive behind that, which is hitting an enemy god with an ability grants you movement speed and mana regen. This passive could be good for keeping you safe and mobile in teamfights. You can get a good amount of movement speed from it, and it gives you almost infinite mana, honestly. It's a lot of mana regen. So in terms of the mods themselves, you will see them in the shop. They unlock at level 1, level 7, and then level 14. So that's when you're going to get each of the sets. They're colored differently, so you can see, this is the first set, the purple are the second set, the orange are the third set. And I'll go through everything they do here, but I'll wait until the build section in terms of explaining which ones I think you should take. But in the ability section, we'll explain them all. So for the first set, the first one, you get access to the Thumper turret by alternating between the Inferno Cannon and the Thumper. And the Thumper will do AoE, pulsing, take damage around it, base damage plus in scaling as well. The second one will give you the Thumper turret as well, basically the exact same Thumper turret, but instead of sharing a cooldown and alternating between your Inferno Cannon and your regular turret, this will just go into your consumable slot but be on a longer cooldown of 20 seconds. And we'll just buy this just to showcase what the Thumper is. So that's the Thumper. It's just going to pulse out AoE damage around it to enemies. And then the third one of each set basically is going to be like not turret focused at all. So you generally have 2 turret focused mods in each set, and then the third mod of the set will be just buffing regular base VulCAN'T. So this one doesn't give you the Thumper at all. It just instead gives you 10 CDR on your passive when you hit people, in addition to the movement speed and mana regen that it normally gives. Moving on to set 2 though, the first one of set 2, the Thumper gains increased health and applies an attack speed debuff to enemies hit, which is pretty good. Shrapnel mod, the Inferno Cannon applies damage over time on every shot. And then the third one, the selfish VulCAN'T based one, is Backfire and Magma Bomb deal additional bonus magical damage, some flat and some in scaling. And finally, you have the set 3 mods, the most powerful ones. So level 14 is when you get access to these. The first one, Thumper gains increased HP and applies a magical and physical protection buff to allied gods hit. The surplus mod, you can have 2 Inferno Cannons deployed at the same time, which can be pretty useful. And then the third one, the VulCAN'T selfish one, is Earthshaker trembles enemies hit for 2 seconds, which is your ultimate. My Thumper just straight up solo that you may. Let's go. So yeah, that is all the mods. I'll go into like what I think the best mods are and what your setup should be in the build section. But that's just all of the things that they do and the things you can do with them. But moving into VulCAN'T's regular kit. So first up, we have Backfire, which just does line damage and fires you backwards. This is going to do pretty high damage, and it will fire you backwards a little bit, which can kind of keep you safe in fights. VulCAN'T has no traditional mobility, but through the movement speed on his passive and through a little bit of mobility from this Backfire, you can kind of keep yourself safe a little bit, especially with some self peel from Magma Bomb, which we'll get to in a second. But this is just a simple line damage. It does hit pretty hard once you get some items online in your build. It's got a pretty high intelligence scaling. The second ability is the turret. So this is the Inferno Cannon regularly. This will just shoot in a cone in front of it. It will lock onto targets preferring gods, and it will just shoot them. And I believe it also inherits VulCAN'T's penetration. Yeah, it has 25% base penetration, but then also inherits VulCAN'T's penetration. So this thing can be hitting really hard in the late game, especially against tankier targets. It'll practically ignore like a lot of their protections. But yeah, this can be really good for just putting down on a wave, giving you extra wave clear, hitting gods as well, just doing good damage, creating zoning areas. You just kind of put this down. They can't really walk in front of it unless they want to take a ton of damage. And of course, depending on which mod you have, you might be able to have multiple of these. You might be able to have one that alternates between this and the Thumper. So you can do a bunch of different things with this turret. Moving on to the 3 though, which is Magma Bomb. This is a simple lava bomb. It does AoE damage and knocks enemies up and away. A very simple ability, but it can have a lot of applications. Obviously, it's just good for ranged poke. You can just keep throwing this out at enemies. It's relatively easy to hit. It can be a little harder than some abilities, but it's not too difficult to hit, I wouldn't say. It also combos directly into Backfire for VulCAN'T's like main poking combo, so you can just throw that, and then as they land, you can hit them with the Backfire as well. Or you can even wait for it to land and then kind of predict where they're going to go and hit them with the Backfire, but generally you will just throw the backfire kind of immediately as it hits. So you'll just do that and then boom, and you get the double hit basically. And that can do a lot of damage. It's not doing a whole lot right now, obviously, but once you have a full build online, this combo can hit pretty hard. Another useful application of Magma Bomb is, as I've mentioned, Vulcan isn't the most safe mage in the game. He doesn't have a traditional big dash, but he does have backfire and the movement speed from his passive. But you could also just Magma Bomb on yourself if you're being dived. So let's say this Ymir was trying to hit me or whatever, I just Magma Bomb as I'm running away, knock him away from me and keep running. So that's another good application of Magma Bomb. But finally, let's move on to Vulcan's ultimate, which is Earthshaker. This is going to do an insane amount of damage, and it will also increase in damage based on how far it is fired away. The AoE is massive on it, and it has a little bit of delay on hitting, especially the further you fire it, the more delay there will be. So if you fire it directly on yourself, it's going to be a little bit less delay, but it's going to do a lot less damage as well. This thing deals up to 50% more damage at max range. So if you're just putting it directly on yourself, compared to like all the way over there, it's going to be dealing 50% more damage at max range, which is pretty important. But of course, the travel time is going to be a little bit longer at max range as well, but it can hit insanely hard. You know, even with no items, that's doing a good chunk to that Ymir. And this is obviously really good for team fights. Generally, you want to be trying to throw this out where people aren't going to be expecting it. You know, if they see you fire it, they can often kind of predict where you've fired it and generally like jump away or whatever. But if you can like fire this over a wall in like a jungle team fight and catch people out, the area actually appears like much later than when you fire it, like the area that makes them aware that it's coming. Like if you see here, I fired it. The area only just appeared there, so you really don't get too much time to react to the area appearing underneath you by Vulcan. Also, you really can't catch people out with it if you fire it like over a wall. They don't know you fired it. They only get a little bit of time to kind of react to that, and they might have time to jump away or whatever, or move out of the area. So generally trying to apply a little bit of stealth gameplay with this, you know, obviously not like playing like a Loki or whatever, but trying to fire this where people don't know you fired it, and you can just absolutely blow people up without them realizing it's coming. Also really good for objective secure. Obviously, this is one of the best objective secure / steal abilities in the game. You can fire it from absolutely miles away to steal objectives. You can fire it to secure objectives. And you can even fire it on yourself for self-heal. Like if this Ymir was kind of going on me, I could just kind of like put this on myself and it'll do a lot of damage even at the close ranges. But yeah, that is all of Vulcan's abilities covered and all of his like various combos like the Magma Bomb backfire combo and stuff like that. Let's move into builds. So first up is the mods, which we'll talk about now in terms of what I think the best mod sets are. This is going to be for mid lane intelligence burst Vulcan. I do think Vulcan's, you know, potentially viable with like a more tanky turret based build in like solo lane or support. But I don't think that's particularly good, to be honest. We're mainly going to be covering mid-based intelligence Vulcan builds. That's the best way to play him, in my opinion. In terms of the first mods, it's actually the one we have. It is the gain access to a Thumper turret in your consumable slot. This is the better way of gaining access to Thumper, just because you're not interrupting your casts of Inferno Cannon. With this first mod, you know, you're gonna make an Inferno Cannon and then you're gonna have to wait to make a Thumper, whereas with this one, they're just on separate cooldowns. The Thumper cooldown will be a little bit longer, but it is affected by cooldown rate. Even though it's in your consumable slot, it will still be affected by cooldown rate. So if you're building that in your build, you can have Thumpers up relatively often. This one's on 9 seconds at the moment with the high cooldown reduction. And it's generally just better to just have this in your consumable slot so it's not interrupting your ability to put down Inferno Cannons at all. You just regularly got the Inferno Cannon every time you need it, and then you've also got the Thumper in your consumable slot. It's just a better way of doing it compared to these two mods. I do think the CDR mod is okay, but it's just 10 CDR compared to having a whole extra ability. Generally, I think this is just the best of the first slot mods by far. Next up is the second slot, which I think there's a bit more competition. The attack speed debuff to enemies can be useful on Resonator mod if you're playing against like, you know, double Hunter comps or whatever, but generally that's not really what Vulcan's looking for. For the most part, I like just taking the Magma Bomb backfire do bonus magical damage for ability in base Vulcan. It's just going to add extra damage to your main combo of just doing this to people, and that's generally what I found to be best. Inferno Cannon damage over time is kind of okay as well. You know, if you really want to play around the Inferno Cannon, it can kind of hit fairly hard, but generally what I would like to go for is the Thermal mod. Just increase your overall burst damage with the 3-1 combo. And then for set 3, which you're going to get at level 14, generally the one that I like to go for is the Masterwork mod, giving physical and magical protections to allied gods. This is just really, really powerful at the moment. I think all three of these are quite good. The Earthshaker Tremble is probably the worst one in my opinion, just generally because you're not going to need a Tremble on Earthshaker a lot of the time. Often if you're casting this on someone, it's because you're going to kill them with it, or you're going to very nearly kill them with it. The Tremble isn't really like that valuable in my opinion. It is good, but I think the other two are better. 2 Inferno Cannons can be really funny. You can just put down 2 Inferno Cannons. It's kind of hilarious. It essentially allows you to have 3 turrets out at once, which if you're going for that kind of funny gameplay can be good. But in my opinion, the best one overall is the Masterwork mod. I'm not going to be able to buy this because I just bought the other one, unfortunately. But yeah, I do think the Masterwork mod is best. It makes the Thumper more tanky, which is okay, but not really that relevant. The main thing you're going for here is getting up to 50 both kinds of protections. So if you just stand in your Thumper in a team fight, you're just going to get extra protections. And yeah, just to reset the mods just so I can buy them all, I would just exit and come back in. So yeah, dual mod into thermal mod into Masterwork mod is going to be what you want. And just the protections are so valuable from this. Like you see when I'm not standing in my Thumper, they will wear off after a second. I'm at 72 and 54. And then when I am in the Thumper, I'm 122, 104, it's going to be reducing the amount of damage you take massively. And it can actually keep Vulcan safe quite a lot in the late game team fights. If you're just standing in your Thumper, you know, peeling yourself with Magma Bomb, backfiring away from people, ulting on yourself, you can be very hard to kill, and it can take people a while to take you down, at which point you can put out a lot of damage and your team can put out a lot of damage. It makes Vulcan actually a pretty damn safe mid laner in team fights, just having this mod on its own. Just getting 50 extra protections is kind of nuts. I feel like at some point this might get nerfed down to maybe like 30 protections or something, just because this amount of flat protections for free is kind of insane. At which point maybe you look at some of these other mods, but I think at the moment, until this Masterwork mod gets nerfed, it's the best one in the tier 3. So yeah, this is why we'll go for mid lane in base Vulcan, the dual mod, the thermal mod, and the Masterwork mod, 2, 3, 1 in terms of these sets. And I think that is overall best for a mid lane intelligence based Vulcan. Moving into the regular builds though, in terms of a starter item for mid, you can go either Conduit Gem or Sands of Time in my opinion. I think both are quite good right now. Archmage is going to give you an overall bigger amount of burst damage. You know, as soon as you hit an ability, it's just going to gain essentially 40% scaling, 40% of your intelligence and bonus damage. It's really good. Conduit Gem could also help out with your early lane clears. It does a bunch of true damage to minions and gods as well, mostly for the wave clear in the early game. It's going to be really good. And Pendulum leans a bit more into the cooldown rate. It's going to be giving you probably overall more intelligence as well, but it's not going to give you that same upfront burst damage, but it does give you more cooldown rate. Or basically, it gives you cooldown rate. Conduit Gem doesn't give you any. Personally, I prefer Pendulum of the Ages. I like having the cooldown rate in the build, but personally I think either of these two is viable. You can kind of take your pick if you want more burst damage or more consistent like cooldown rate. Moving into the regular build though, Book of Thoth is actually something I like on Vulcan first. I think he has really high intelligence scalings, and so having Book of Thoth and just being able to get an insane amount of int from that can be really good, especially because you're also taking the mod that gives you increased scaling on Backfire and Magma Bomb. That can also add a lot to it, and just his scalings in general are really high. The ultimate does 110% intelligence scaling, which is 1.5x if you're firing at max range. So that would be, you know, like over 150% in scaling on the ultimate if you're firing at max range, which is kind of ridiculous. The 3 has 90%, the 1 has 80%, the turret has 40% per shot. The Thumper is also dealing 10% per tick as well. He just generally has a lot of int scaling in his kit. Like if you're full kit dumping someone, you're going to be dealing a large percentage of your int damage. So I do like Book of Thoth, even though it is a bit slower than some other options in mid. I think the amount of intelligence this gives you is really valuable. So generally I will go Book of Thoth first. You will then go into Soul Gem and Gem of Focus. This is generally just what most mid laners go at the moment. These items are just really strong. Soul Gem gives you int, lifesteal, and cooldown rate, as well as bonus damage and healing every 4th ability, which is really good. And Gem of Focus gives you intelligence, cooldown rate, and then more intelligence and movement speed each time you cast an ability. You can stack this with Vulcan's passive that's already giving you movement speed, and you can actually kind of get a lot of movement speed going with this, and you can actually be quite slippery. As I said, Vulcan has no traditional dash, but with Gem of Focus and his movement ability and his self-heal with Magma Bomb ulting on himself, the Thumper protections, you can actually be incredibly safe in late game team fights, considering he has no traditional dash or jump. So yeah, Soul Gem, Gem of Focus, absolutely essential in your Vulcan build in my opinion. Generally after that, I will start going into like maybe a Rod of Zehuti. This is again just going to give you an insane amount of intelligence. It's going to boost all intelligence from items by 20%. Meaning this item alone has 84, and then it's also going to be giving you a crap ton of extra from all of your other items. Pendulum of the Ages also has very high intelligence at 70, plus another up to 70 based on your available mana. And since you've got Book of Thoth in the build and you've got a lot of mana regen on your passive, you're going to be at very high mana for most team fights. And so ultimately Pendulum of the Ages is almost always going to be giving you like over 100 intelligence in most team fights. So this can be really good boosted with Rod of Zehuti. And then generally I'll go into an Obsidian Shard. Obsidian Shard is the go-to percent pen for Vulcan. I think Totem of Death can be okay on him because it will proc on the turret, and you can like stack it up relatively easily that way. And you also essentially have 5 abilities if you're going the mod set that I go with the Thumper, so you can stack up Totem of Death relatively easily, but I do still think Obsidian Shard is better. Especially because Vulcan generally sort of like engages with an ultimate. You know, if you're just firing your ultimate to start off a team fight and do big damage, Totem of Death is giving you no pen for that, whereas Obsidian Shard is giving you that 20% always. So I do prefer Obsidian Shard to Totem on Vulcan in terms of my percent pen option. You can go both if you really want a load of percent pen. I think that's an option. But if you're only going one of them, definitely go Obsidian Shard. And then in terms of the last item in your build, you can kind of flex in a bunch of different things here, in my opinion. I don't think there's one final item that Vulcan like absolutely needs or anything. Divine Ruin is often a very common one. You wouldn't go in last slot. You will probably, if we just sell off a few of these items, you'll probably go Divine Ruin, you know, maybe before you Gem Focus or something like that. So you go Divine into Gem, Rod Shard, and your build will look like this. Divine is something you're going to need, honestly, at least half of your games. There's a lot of healing at the moment with self-sustain from gods like Anubis and Hades, healers like your Moja and Aphrodite. Divine Ruin is something you're going to need quite a lot. But if you don't need Divine Ruin, you can slot in something else. Worldstone, I think, is actually okay right now. You've got a lot of cooldown rate already in this build, and Worldstone can stack on top of that and make your ultimate very low cooldown. Vulcan's ultimate is really powerful. Chronos Pendant, after the buff that it got to give it a little bit more intelligence, I think is okay in builds right now if you want to go super high cooldown rate. This is relatively cheap, has very high cooldown rate, and obviously the passive 1 second off of your ability cooldowns every 10 seconds. This is more valuable the more cooldown rate you have in your build, and this build already has a good amount of it. We've got 20 here, 10 here, 15 here, and then 25 here. So Chronos Pendant, I think, is an option as well. Dreamer's Idol is okay, I think, if you want to go for like an insane amount of bursts. It's a really fun item, in my opinion. The displacement immunity can be relevant in some matchups, but the 25% increased intelligence can be kind of nuts. You can see we're at 865 intelligence here with this active effect, and that's without my Book of Thoth stack. That's without any other buffs like Fire Giant or any potions or anything like that. So you can get to really high intelligence numbers with Dreamer's Idol. That could be good as well. Doom Mob could also be valuable. I wouldn't really go this in this kind of a build. Usually you go Doom Mob like in place of Book of Thoth as your rush. This can give you movement speed, which can be helpful to stack with Vulcan's passive. Wish Granting Pearl is even an option. This gives a lot of intelligence and also some max health, which can keep you safe in team fights. If you're like 2800 health with this much protection standing in your Thumper, you can be very hard to kill. Super expensive item. I would generally only go this later in your build if you think the game's going to like stall out and go super late game, but that's a viable option as well. But I think in general, if you just want a build that you can use and you don't want to think about it too much, I would go Divine Ruin, just because most games you're going to need this. And then into your Gem of Focus, your Rod, and your Shard. This will be like the most generic Vulcan build I could give you, just because you do need Divine Ruin so often. But yeah, as I've said, if you don't need Divine Ruin, you can throw in something else like a Chronos Pendant, a Worldstone, a Tome of Death, a Mob Pen, Doom Mob, whatever. But yeah, that is the general build I will be looking at for Vulcan. This build has some pretty insane intelligence, also some pretty solid cooldown rate. You're looking at, I think, around 20, 35, 45 cooldown rate, which is probably equivalent to around 30% cooldown reduction. But as I said, you can go for more. If you feel like you don't need the Divine Ruin, you can throw in a Chronos Pendant, and then you're at 60 cooldown rate, which is almost 40% cooldown reduction, plus you've got the Chronos Pendant as well. But yeah, in general, in a lot of games, you are going to need that Divine Ruin, so I would recommend this kind of a build. And yeah, as you can see with that fully stacked Book of Thoth, we're getting 725 in with this build, which is going to hit really hard. You know, the ultimate is 110%. It goes up to like 165% or something at max range. 165% of 700 is a lot of damage. So yeah, overall, this will be the build I recommend for Vulcan mid. As I said, I think you can maybe find some kind of niche viability with a more turret-focused mod set and a bit of a tankier build in like support or solo or whatever, but I'm not really going to cover that in this guide. I don't think it's like going to actually be good. I think it's just people experimenting with things on Vulcan's like release week. I think generally this is going to be the way you play Vulcan. You play him in mid lane, you build full intelligence, and you go this kind of a mod set that I've got. But yeah, hopefully this has been helpful for you in terms of understanding Vulcan. You got a lot of changes in terms of the mod sets and stuff coming into SMITE 2, so hopefully this has helped you with that. Let me know who you want to see next for the guide series, and I'll catch you guys for another one later. Peace.